Hello and welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics at our new kind of regular time. Yeah, we've been trying to get on air for like 10 minutes. Well, Alex was a bit late because she had to do something. And Martin was on in the beginning and he was showing off his posh new microphone. And then the Fenland internet gremlins got him and he disappeared. So we hope he's coming back because he was tantalizing me with 2 questions from listeners, which we promised to do. And then he disappeared halfway through telling me what they are as well. So we don't know what those questions are at the moment. I haven't heard from David. Is David still AWOL? I haven't seen him recently.
We don't know, but I said Martin and David can join if and when they can the conversation. So we're going to, I think, make a start to think about what's been going on for the past week or so. There's been obviously every Thursday there are by-elections, lots of commentary around some of those results, and of course, I feel free to add your questions. I know Martin had a couple of questions from listeners, but if you have any questions, meanwhile, please do pop them in the comments. So then we can take some more questions at the end as well. So. Yeah, by-elections, Stephen, what did you think about the results?
Martin, better late than never. Martin has hopefully resolved his family issues.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I'm joined you with a decent signal now. Apologies for being late.
Can you just give us a quick flash of your new microphone, just so we can all see it?
The new microphone that I've knocked over, this one here. There you go.
One of that's proper glow in the dark stuff as well. Like you're not, as I said earlier, you can't be a proper podcaster unless you have your microphone obscuring your face. I had this one for 6 months before I plugged it in.
To be fair, there'll be people watching this that are praying for me to have a microphone obscuring my face.
Exactly. So we halfway through doing our off mic chat, Martin disappeared. So he promised me 2 questions for listeners, which we'll try and do at the end. Yeah, and because I don't know what they are, they can be anything now. So they might.
One of them might be relevant. It's to do with by-elections, actually. So
let's start by talking about this Thursday's action in by-elections and largely a resounding victory for Reform, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's the question that Richard submitted. Is what do we think the message is from those by-elections? And it is what we all know, which is Reform are on a high at the moment. I mean, that's it as far as I'm concerned. I've obviously made a decision myself, which I've gone public with, that I'm going to stand as an independent in Whittlesea. A by-election that's coming up. We talked about
that's a Fenland District Council election, yeah.
It's I'm going to stand for both Fenland and Town Council because it gives people a continuity, and I think it makes it smoother on election day if people are voting for. Voting for the same name on both tickets. So I've decided to do that. I know what I'm up against, and I know Reform are on a high at the moment. And the seat I'm in, Chris Bowden won it at the last district elections, but not by many. So basically, I know what I'm up against, but fingers crossed, people see what I'm about. But
so you said that Chris Bowden won it at the last election, but it's not his seat that's up for contention because it's the one vacated under the clowns with crayons.
It is. But I'm not going to mention her name again. She's resigned and whatever. But she talked about clowns with crayons and describing the council, and she's done some conversations with the Cambs Times as well. Which go onto the Cambs Times website, you can read it, where she talks about the stuff that I know, which is complaining about bullying, with it, and there's a reality, which is that in 2 years we have had 5 by-elections for Fenland District Council in Whittlesea, and that's about bullying.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I don't know about anything about the circumstances, but bullying doesn't sound very clever. But actually, for the ratepayer in Finland, each of those by-elections costs a fair few quid as well, doesn't it? It's not cheap to hold these elections as well. So
you're right, and you are right that we shouldn't ignore the fact that it's cost the council taxpayer money. But all this stuff that's going on, which has been going on for a long time around bullying and stuff, which I, when I stood in the other Whittlesea ward, Whittlesea South, last time, I raised with people, that it was an issue that ex-councillors were telling me the reason they resigned was bullying. And, we've got the same again. And all that, while people are focusing on those issues, they're not focusing on the business of the council.
Yeah. Yeah. So So there's going to be a by-election, yeah, and we're so when's the by-election going to be? In October, late October? You know, is there a date for it yet?
It hasn't been called yet, so I don't know. That's one of the things.
Basically, the election's going to be in October or possibly November. I'm sure it will be called. Yeah. And reality is, as far as we know, there's going to be a felon due up for. Are they on the same cycle as Huntingdonshire? So they due up for elections next year as well.
Yeah. 2027.
Okay, that's good.
So so they had
it's the same time. It's 1 year after.
So most councils, most district councils are up in 2027. Huntingdonshire and I think South Cambs bucked the trend a little bit on that, and I think that's because they used to elect by thirds.
Yeah,
and you know, when they moved to electing every 4 years, I think when they moved into an odd part of the cycle.
Yeah, Cambridge City is still by thirds, so there's thirds elections.
So I was just worried that if you did get elected, it might be going back. I think at the moment we're expecting in Huntingdonshire that we're going to have to go to elections in May, possibly for a single-year term before local government reorganisation, which seems
my guess is the government, if they've made a decision to move to unitaries in 2027. My guess is that they'll postpone the elections in Huntingdonshire. They should. It doesn't make sense to have elections 1 year and then another.
Yeah, I don't think it makes sense either, but I heard that previously, obviously, Angela Rayner felt quite strongly about this topic. So I actually wonder what happens now with the new ministers in place and whether they will rethink again those decisions, because so far what I heard is like it's definitely going ahead. So we're not going to postpone anything else. But if the unitaries, if a decision is made quite soon, then it really doesn't make sense to have it for 1 year.
It's one of the things I wonder about is how sold is the new Secretary of State on local government reorganisation. I think it would be a shame if, having gone through the pain that we've already gone through, to postpone it and go through that again. I know there's more pain to come. I know that, but at least we're part way through the process. So why not just get it done?
Yeah. So how many by-elections were there this week?
There were quite a few. I think there's a couple that didn't go reform, but it's interesting to see the context. Like I know there's a Conservative gain from a residents association in Cheshire East, and it's an interesting one as well because reform actually was only 123%, whereas reform is polling around 30% in the others. So that's an example where the Conservatives actually managed to gain it from the residents association, but with a decreased Conservative vote share, but still coming first because of how the vote splits. So very interesting one. And there's a Lib Dem gain from Conservative in Bournemouth, which is with an almost 30% reform lead, but the Lib Dems managed to, again, with a decreased vote share from previous elections, still gain the seat because of the vote split with reform. So I would say that, but everything else is, I think, a reform gain. So the picture is, even in those cases where two by-elections were either gained by Lib Dems or the Conservatives from someone else, it's gaining on a decreased vote share for your party because of the split of the vote as well. So it's not that you're not actually winning a higher vote share. So it's an interesting one.
The ones that Richard pointed out to me were Stotfold and was it Newmarket East, both of which went to reform, and quite comfortable reform majorities as well, actually. And the point Richard makes is we're increasingly heading towards basically, I mean, I think he said a 3-party state, but it's effectively a 4-party state. And arguably 5 if you include the Greens, because they're, having the odd success, and they're certainly having an impact
in local politics, especially.
Yeah.
So I mean, so we talked about a bit out off mic though. So to what extent do we think that this kind of upsurge in reform support is due to the vacuum left by a poor Conservative Party with, I think, a poor leader, and also Keir Starmer's continued unpopularity in Downing Street? The government's not very popular at all, is it? And is it because those parties are struggling that they've left a vacuum which reform are filling? Because the Lib Dems do seem to benefit as well, because they're not either of those parties and sometimes sneak through in by-elections as well.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it's also like about the campaigning as well, because it'll be very interesting to see what happens when we have all up elections. Because in the by-elections, what you can't do in 6 weeks is having the all year round campaigning, having a very well-known candidate working the seat up for like 2 years, or like relying on like, any amount of personal voter. So it's all about like what you can do in those 6 weeks as well. And I think Reform, a very big advantage they have, in addition to having the kind of base vote higher, is the fact that they actually have quite a few non-voters voting Reform. So the kind of like usual non-voter base, which other parties can't really tap into the same extent, is turning up for Reform in some areas. So, but first of all, you're just starting from like a higher vote share. So anyone else will have to do like an even higher amount of work, which the shorter the time you have before the election, the less you can actually do in terms of how many people you can speak to or leaflet or persuade as well.
It's also Reform have the benefit of not having a track record as well. The record of running councils goes back 3 months, May, June, July, August, maybe 4 months. But so they haven't got a record that they've got to stand up for, and I think that helps them. I've just put that question from Claire up. Is the media partly to blame here? I don't think they are. I have big issues with the way the media behave, and the fact that the media, as far as politics is concerned, they spend the whole time chasing the next scandal and the next story. So day-to-day politics, of which there's a lot of good goes on, gets ignored and not talked about. But I don't think the media have any choice but to talk to a large extent about Reform, because they're leading in the opinion polls, they're winning by-elections. So I don't think they're to blame. I think the political parties are to blame, the Conservative Party especially. I think the Conservative Party, the more they try and the more they create the look and feel of being Reform light, the more they're driving voters towards Reform. Because why vote for Reform light when you can vote for the real thing? They've this is a passion of mine, so I could rant on for about 6 hours about this, but I genuinely believe the Conservative Party have abandoned one nationism, and they come across as a party that lacks compassion as a result of it, and the only thing they've got beyond that is basically to try and out-reform, and they're just not good enough at it.
I think that's really true, especially if I was, let's say, a journalist or like writing a story or like covering immigration, of course you'll have like some balance of Reform comments, because they are the most kind of extreme as a story, like whatever, like maybe Kemi Badenoch is trying to say on it, or like someone else like from a different party, like you kind of will lead with the most kind of shocking suggestions from, I don't know, the Reform Party conference, whatever it is. Well, some people say like, well, it's not fair. You should have a balance of like, showing what the Greens think or what the Lib Dems think. But in terms of like what it actually gets out there and gets clicks and gets like, shared on social media, unfortunately, a lot of the news cycle does go like this. And some of the most, shocking things, or like, things that like will prompt comments, are from Reform on certain topics. And it's unsurprising, I think, that the media are reporting on those.
I also think that there is an issue, and just going back, Kemi Badenoch had a good week this week. I think she did and said all the right things for the first time in a long time, actually, in PMQs, and I think those things will start to have an impact if she keeps doing it. But they need a policy platform, and I know she said she's going to wait until she starts delivering policy, but people need to desperately see what the Conservative Party are about, and at the moment they can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way in which Reform have benefited previously is because of the personal celebrity appeal of Nigel Farage, and we saw that in May last year when Reform was starting to they did make an impact, didn't they, in the May elections this year in the May 2025 elections. God, and like we had in St Neots, I was in St Neots, and suddenly the word goes out, Nigel Farage is in Market Square with the Reform people, and I saw people, who otherwise I would regard as being quite liberal thinking people suddenly go glazy-eyed, getting their posters signed by Nigel Farage. And so previously his own personal appeal had got him, I think, a slightly unfair amount of publicity. But as you say, with their publicity in the polls at the moment and the situation in the polls and the way they performed in the May elections, the way we think they're going to appeal, I mean, they've got a right to be there at the moment, haven't they? There's no question about that, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah, and I just said he's got no record to go back to. I mean, there are questions being asked about him, and the fact that he claimed that he bought a house in Clacton, and now it turns out it wasn't him; it was his girlfriend. And there's questions about did he avoid tax and blah blah blah. And he's going to come under that sort of scrutiny more and more. And I certainly hope he does. But, one of the things, I'm in the middle, as you can imagine, of drafting some election leaflets and stuff like that. And one of the things that I made I don't, to a certain extent, I don't blame people for voting, for leaning towards reform. And the reason for that is because people see politics failing them. We've got an economy that is absolutely shot. Public services just not delivering by and large, everything taking, forever. A health service that desperately needs improvement. And yes, the Labour Party are trying to deliver on it, but a year on, people aren't seeing it from the Labour Party. They are seeing that it was a Conservative Party that caused those problems. The growth that Keir Starmer keeps talking about is not happening, and actually the Labour Party are in a massive hole as far as the next budget is concerned at the moment. And they see all that going on, and the alternative is either turn to the Lib Dems, which some people are, or turn to something new, which is Reform UK. And if you go back to En Marche and France, that's what they did, and the eventual outcome of that was that we got Macron as president. Whether we'll go that far here or not, I don't know. But the Conservative Party have got to wake up, because if Farage does go, no, not Farage, if Keir Starmer does go, and I think he's on his way out, it might take a few months, but I do think he's on his way out. The Conservative Party are going to do the normal thing that a party in opposition does, which is scream for a general election. And actually, if they do, they've not got a chance of winning it.
No. And it feels a bit like that in local politics in general, doesn't it, as well? So, at HDC, we've got, I keep saying, a very strong Conservative opposition who do a great job with some great councillors. But there is a feeling, there's a feeling is that when we do go to elections, if we do go to elections in May, that it's going to be carnage all over. Yeah. And it's not, and whatever council emerges in HDC in May is not going to look like this council. And so the question is, almost sometimes you can sit in debates and you can say what you're annoyed about and you can do your leaflets, but if the electorate are going to vote for somebody else and it's all going to change, isn't it? And so it's interesting times. And the issue really I think in local government is that, having been a councillor for I think 8 years by the next election, like most of it's about resource allocation and what you can do with the very little bits available. Yeah. And the truth is you can have an angry protest for whoever, but when they come in, it's very difficult to make any real changes. And so it's like you say, Martin, I suppose when these councils, they have been elected, but they're going to have faced exactly the same problems as anybody else, aren't they? And you can talk about austerity and making cuts, but like my time as a councillor and Alex's time as a councillor has been cuts left, right, and centre. It probably looks like when you were leader of Fenland and the county council, they probably seemed like glory days compared to now, didn't they, Martin? I'm sure they weren't at the time, but there was a much more available, wasn't there? It just seems to be less and less all the time.
We were starting when I was leader. We were going through the cuts agenda, and it was really starting to bite. But we were still at a point where we could look at things that we didn't have to do. But some of the stuff, like cuts to bus provision as an example, we were having to do because we'd got this we'd got the Conservatives putting limits on the amount you could increase council tax, and at the same time cutting government funding. And part of a triumvirate, we'd got social care costs going through the roof. We'd got a a prevention agenda that was running through children's services and adult social care at the time, where we were actually reducing the number of children coming into care by actually trying to intervene earlier with parents. And we were starting to look at, what were we doing in terms of falls prevention and, other stuff to try and keep older people well longer, stuff like that. But the trouble is, as the government cut money, the less you could invest in that sort of stuff. And that's part of why the county council is where it is because of prevention. And I'm a passionate believer in prevention. I always have been. And I just don't think councils are funded to do it. Certainly county councils. And, I think the same at government level as well, by the way. I think if you look at our prison system, if we sat and looked at prevention rather than slamming people in prison to help them become better criminals, would save money and would improve people's lives. And that to me is what prevention is.
Well, the same with the NHS as well. If we put more stuff in the frontline stuff and not in the kind of tertiary care stuff, it's the same thing. Is we spend, it's the same thing. If you prevent things at source, they cost much less than they do later on when they escalate.
Wes Streeting, to his credit, is onto that, and he's talked about it quite a lot. And I've said a few times that we don't have a national health service; we have a national treatment service. But Wes Streeting does seem to be onto that. If we're going to talk about the national,
let's not stray onto the NHS and other problems that we cannot solve today. Here's a question from Emma. Emma finds it interesting that Reform is technically a company and not a political party, which I think is unusual, isn't it? Compared to the, I think up until February, Nigel Farage was a majority shareholder in Reform Limited, which you can see on Companies House. Yeah, does that make any difference, or is it just a new way of having a political party? I mean, they've had to emerge from nowhere, and so having new models of governance and having these things emerge in different ways, I'm not particularly concerned about it. How are you?
What bothers me about it is there somebody, and we know who the is making money out of memberships for Reform, and the stories are that Nigel Farage makes money out of every single membership that comes in, and that would bother me because that's not what political parties are about. I don't know the truth behind that. I know what I read and everything else, which points in that direction. But it's also true that he is talking about properly constituting Reform. So, we have to see. But it is weird the way Reform have been structured.
Yeah, I mean, it is an unusual model, but I'm not sure how much it matters from, I guess, the voter perspective, because I would assume that people who are inclined to vote Reform, they will be probably yeah, so what if it's not a party, as long as, it tells the message that I want to hear or to vote for. I'm not sure if going on the line of they're not a political party, they're a company, and, X or Y is making money out of this. I'm not sure if it will cut through to the demographic that already is voting Reform. So, because I've seen some of the kind of attacks on that, and I don't think the kind of attacks on those lines actually work to persuade people not to vote for Reform. But that's maybe my view.
So Andrew has commented here as well, and I'm pointing out, of course, that Reform isn't the only new political or relatively new political party in terms of, I think we can see Andrew's sympathy because he's got his profile picture of Jeremy Corbyn. But he says, what about the left? Your party, Cambridge, which I think is the new Jeremy Corbyn party, isn't it?
And Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn.
And Jeremy Corbyn. What's your opinion on that? I mean, I think one of the things we've suffered with too much in this country is two-party state, swapping between the Conservatives and Labour every now and then. So I think having more players, I mean, it doesn't necessarily make the election. Well, we'll see how electoral any of these parties are, but having more voices and more candidates, I think, representing the true feeling of people and the true political position of people, I think is generally a good thing, don't you?
No, I absolutely do. It's one of my frustrations, with where I am at the moment, is I'm politically homeless. As a One Nationist, there isn't a party for me. I've had some people tell me that the Lib Dems are a One Nation party. They absolutely aren't. I really don't like the way the Lib Dems campaign either. And it puts me off. But I feel politically homeless. That's a reality. I think there is a real danger with the Your Party thing, that the Labour Party will do exactly what the Conservative Party have done, which is that if they start to lose votes to Your Party or whatever they're called when they get a proper name, it is that they'll start chasing votes to the left. And as a centrist, I think that will have a serious impact on the Labour Party. It is a reality, and I hope they're mindful of that. Actually,
I think it will really depend on the area, because I can see Your Party being quite popular in some areas, especially on some of the key issues they've been campaigning on, and obviously Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana have been campaigning on. What I'm not sure is what happens when you have both Your Party and Green Party candidates standing, like let's say at the local level in the same seat, unless, and I'm not involved in any of this kind of internal conversations, but I'm not sure to what extent the Green Party or Your Party will do like agreements between them not to stand in the same areas, because from, I guess, a messaging view, some of it is at least perceived to be similar on like some of the key issues that voters are concerned about. So I'm not sure what will happen when the vote splits several ways on the left or center left.
So are you saying that the Green Party are a legitimate voice of the left then, or one of the legitimate voices?
Well, I'm thinking like in some of the terms of the issues that Corbyn and Zara Sultana campaigned about, like let's say like foreign policy issues, or like their issues around like migration and making a more positive case for migration. Like I see a lot of the similar narratives within the Green Party as well. So yeah, I'm just saying from like a voter perspective in a local election, I'm not sure how that would work out in terms of, I guess, splitting the vote. And I think kind of the candidates that are standing will make a big difference as well, because obviously if you're like a very popular and active Green Party councillor, you might get more votes than a Your Party candidate. And similarly, if you have a Your Party candidate that's been very active in the community, that kind of might have a lot of more impact.
I just want to say some great comments coming up, by the way. It's some really good stuff. I'm just going to put this because I think this is an interesting point. If I can find it again, which is what the point of the discussion, and there's a circular agreement of depression about how ineffective you all are. I don't think that's true, Andrew, actually. And I, we've had this conversation, and we had the conversation last week about actually how well run, as an example, Huntingdonshire is. I do believe a lot of local government is just a delivery arm for government. And I think it's one of the failings of our system in this country. But some councils are better than others. There's no two ways about that, and are more effective than others. And so I'm not sure that is correct, but it is certainly true that politics is having a tough time, and financial, when the political system, and that's our economy as a country, struggles, political parties struggle to deliver. There's no two ways about it, because the money's not there. And how do you invest in new ways of doing things? How do you invest in change if you don't have an economy that's able to fund it? And I think there's also a need for a conversation, and this is true at local level and at national level, about what it is we want local government to do, what is it we want national government to do, so that we can manage people's expectations around what we can do financially.
But also, I'd say, especially in local government, I would, obviously I'm going to say this as an independent, and as a, I've always been independent, but actually kind of large-scale political ideologies have very little to do with these resource allocation problems we face every day at councils, and actually what I'd prefer is that we took some of the politics out of it, and we just we debated on what was best for residents, and sometimes that's difficult to do, and we're seeing it now with the LGR stuff, where there's lots of the arguments from lots of the councils about what benefits the political parties rather than what benefits individual people, and I find that really upsetting, because I think you say I think at Huntingdonshire we've achieved quite a lot. I'm not going to go into our record, but I'm quite proud of what we've achieved. It's been a hard grind for 4 years, but we've got some stuff done. Stuff like civil parking enforcement, stuff like getting St Neots sorted. There's stuff like the green bins, which is maybe seen as a negative thing. Stuff like council tax support, where we've cut things. Those things I'm very proud of. Also, increasing the amount people are complaining about number of empty properties, Huntingdonshire, and Huntingdonshire, we increased the amount of council tax payable for people with second homes to the maximum we're allowed to. So we've done what we can within legislation. Yeah, were we perfect? No, but that's largely because it's fairly apolitical, because we're a bunch of independents, Liberal Democrats, Labour, and Green councillors who are forced to work together and forced to come to compromises, and that means we can't ever rely on our political ideology. I don't think, for me, I think in local politics, in the early days of Huntingdonshire District Council, for the first couple of times, it was independent because it wasn't about politics. And I think that sometimes Westminster politics projected onto local stages is ineffective, and that it makes me worry about what reform will do in the councils they take control of, and the further councils they will inevitably take control of, because actually they're largely campaigning on national issues and cost cutting, which is what we all have to do anyway.
Or our interesting promises. That's the difficult thing, is like whether I remember one of the reform leaflets in the county election saying fixing all potholes. Like, you can't fix every single one of them. You have to say, like, okay, how will you manage it better? Would you review the contracts? Would you put some more powers to town councils? I don't know, but you can't just say you're going to fix every single problem. Or indeed stop the boats. Again, not in the powers of the council to do so. Like, that's a national government, obviously discussion, and you can lobby your MP for that. But that's what really annoys me, is it gets so politicized that it's not about what you can do. Then you get elected and you can't fix every single pothole, and you can't stop the boats, or you can't do this, or on the other side of the argument, you can't end different other national policies. So that's, I try to be realistic locally.
That's the point about populism, isn't it? Populism makes it seem like government is easy. And that's what populists are there to do, is to win votes by telling people we know what we're going to do and it's easy. And it never is. And Farage came unstuck around this recently when, he said, we'd start sending people back after 2 weeks. Yeah. And then he had to put an amendment to say,
it's taking longer.
Well, it'll take a year to 2 years at the very least to get the legislation sorted out. And then probably some time after that for the legislation to be tested through the courts as well. So, and that's true at a local level as well. Making change happen at a local level takes time, and the notion that you can just turn up into government, which is what Reform have pretended, make all the savings they want to make and deliver all the services they want to deliver, is rubbish. And I'll give you a great example, which is Kent County Council. The first thing that Reform did is say, we found a load of savings. Do you know where they found the load of savings? They cut and pasted the audit report from the year before. And it's that sort of stuff. As an example, they're talking about in, I think, every single one of the councils, which shows how centrally they are controlled as well. Every single one of the councils they control, cutting translation services. It's damned immoral. Is a reality. If you've got somebody that, as an example, is a non-English speaker going through the social care system, and you deny them the right to understand exactly what is happening to them, then that's immoral. There's no two ways about it, as far as I'm concerned. And so, these things are. But that's what populism is, and there's a reality, which is that populism just does not work.
I mean, the other thing is, obviously you can say whatever you want in the election, populist or not, you get voted in. But then, one of the good examples for me is actually the reform-led council in Kent on social work visas, because obviously, kind of the key line is we have to be very tough on immigration to actually stop immigration as much as possible. And then obviously getting in the council and realizing we actually have quite a high share of social care workers who are foreign born. And actually now the leadership saying that we have the government, i.e. the Labour government, has to reconsider the Labour government's proposal to end the social care work visa in their white paper, because they realize this is a very big issue. I'm actually having a debate, I hope, next council meeting around what's the impact on Cambridgeshire County Council. But there's this thing, you kind of think, oh, it's a great idea to end all those immigration routes. And then you get in and actually realize you can't phase it out so quickly, because it is about delivery as well. You can agree with it in principle. I can say I would like this route to end or not end, but whether I can do this, I can do this in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, it depends on so many things that I wouldn't have known before I was elected, because I wouldn't have seen those numbers and this data from the council. So that's just one other example.
Apparently, by the way, just to show this, I'm a woke lefty, so that's interesting because
I would like to say I'm just pragmatic, because it's very easy for me to just say like a bunch of things that are not actually implementable, but I'm not going to, even if this means losing an election.
I know where I sit politically, and I'm certainly not a woke lefty. That's for definite.
No, I don't think I'd ever describe you as that, Martin.
I think Stephen is the most woke lefty on here. Like Martin is definitely a conservative.
Oh, bloody, that's coming from a Labour Party councillor. I think Claire is also suggesting a new name for the podcast, which is All Talk and No Substance, which I quite like actually. And is consider the lack of preparation we do for these. It's entirely accurate.
I've made a living out of that, by the way. So.
That's local politics.
That's not true. If any of my clients are watching, that's not true. But no, I mean, there's a point about sometimes you've got to say things, and this is the point. I was about speaking truth to people, and it's one of the things that politicians are not doing anywhere near enough. And that includes at a local level as well. And I see it in Finland all the time, by the way. Which is, you've got to tell people this isn't tough and this isn't straightforward. But you've also got to give a bit of direction as well. And there's a reality. You cannot put somebody through, as an example, a care system, and a child through social care. And if they don't have great English, to put them through that system and have them not understand what's happening, that's not wokeism. That's just being a decent human being. And if being woke is being a decent human being, yeah, I'm woke. That's fine.
We'll clip that, and with Martin saying yes, I'm woke. Yeah, and we'll put that.
The advert against Martin.
That's going to go out in the Finland. I'm going to pay for money for that in Finland. Yeah, that's going to be your campaign.
But I'll give you an example. Okay, within Finland, we have got a study going on at the moment about Whittlesea bypass. Okay, and a Whittlesea relief road. Now, I am a big supporter of the need for a relief road around Whittlesea, because the A605 through town is slowly getting clogged up. And the dialogue around that isn't helped, obviously, by the farce that is the railway crossing. But all this is going on, and all it's sort of happening in a vacuum. They tell people that's happening, but there's a reality which we all know, and we all know because of what's been talked about with roads elsewhere around the county as well, that you're not going to be able to deliver a relief road around Whittlesea without a significant amount of development. And it's true. People may not like that, but it's the truth. And that's the truth you have to be telling people. So when you start talking to people about studies and stuff like that, you've got to say, actually, one of the likely outcomes of this is that we're going to have to fund this through development. That may be business growth as well as is housing growth. But that's the reality, and that's the honesty. And the leadership at Finland don't do it. And that's where you can make a difference. And, you can also make sure that the people that are investing in that growth, in whatever way, are guided in the right way. And then we go back to the Huntington Futures document, which we talked about last week. That's where locally you can make a difference. You're not going to be able to resist development. You're not going to be able to resist growth if you want significant change. But what you can do is help people understand, what that growth is, and manage expectations around it.
And also that the compromise between from the developers, how much of the money is invested in infrastructure, how much of it is invested in social housing, how much of it is invested in green initiatives and biodiversity, because all those things also play off against each other sometimes as well, don't they? And that's quite difficult for councils planning local plans. That's a difficult compromise that we all have to make, and one in Huntingdonshire, well, if we have time left, we're going to have to do as well. So there's lots of difficult decisions, and that's why we have democracy. We elect people like me and Alex and possibly Martin to take difficult decisions on our behalf. And if you think that your reform candidate can do a better job than us, then I'm quite happy to stand aside at the next election if somebody gets more votes for me. Absolutely, that's the way democracy works.
Here we go again, right? See, Andrew, here's a point, okay? Andrew's put that comment up. Development be damned. There's a practicality. we live in a world where taxes are too high and there isn't enough free money. So there is nowhere and nobody that is going to invest in a bypass from the government without an economic return in one way or another. That's a reality. That's practical. And yeah, it's great. Somebody during the election campaign can put that through somebody's door and somebody go, oh, they're right. But they're not right, because it can't happen that way and it won't happen that way. And that's about being honest with people.
Oops, sorry. I think Claire has also clarified that all talk on no substance was not about us. Well, I'm disappointed because I thought it was a really accurate decision. It's an accurate description of me. I'm not sure about my learned colleagues, so that's fine. So I think we've done that, and yeah, I think reform are a threat to the establishment. And I think that's only right, because if they get the nations and people vote for them, then that's good, isn't it? And it's good to shake things up. I think we've been stuck in a two-party state for too long, so I welcome it personally. Yeah,
and I think there is a truth about mainstream political parties, which is the point about reform. It is change or die. That's reality, and the political parties have got to wake up to that. The Conservative Party desperately needs to change, and it needs leadership that is going to tell people that it has to change. Because if it stays where it is, it's got nowhere to go.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome more democracy in the sense of having a broader range of choices for the electorate being more informed and so on. What I don't welcome is the narrative, some of the narratives we have seen, which actually makes other parties and makes some conservative politicians, some Labour politicians, some other politicians of other types actually try to reform on, for example, negative discourse around immigration or other issues. And I think, yeah, there's a time for each party to say, do we want to actually try the reform strategy on those topics, or should we have a discussion as to what is our actual policy on this and actually try to have a more positive discussion on the real things we can deliver, rather than just trying to copy certain things.
If those political parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in particular, arguably the Lib Dems as well, and this is there's evidence of this, to a certain extent at a local level. We had the Rainbow Coalition, which was reasonably successful at county council. We've got the Rainbow Coalition at Huntingdon that shows it can happen if they want to deal with some of those issues. And the main issue we know that reform is talking about, which is immigration. If they want, why not sit around a table together? Why not try and do that and try and actually come together with a joint strategy that says this is how we're going to deal with it? Because if they got it right, then they'd shoot reform's fox, wouldn't they? They won't do it, by the way.
So talking about sitting around a table and coalitions, Rainbow coalitions, do you think there's any possibility with the rise of reform that we'll see some coalitions that involve Conservatives, Lib Dems, even Labour, or not? Or do you think it's kind of the lefter parties, including some independents, are
at the local level?
Get into bed together? Is anybody going to get into bed with the Conservatives, do you think, to hold off reform? So certainly in Huntingdonshire, the situation is the Conservatives are still the biggest party overall. At County Council, when I was on County Council, the Conservatives were the biggest party, but the coalition was other parties clubbing together to get more seats and more votes and elect the leader, basically. Do you think there's any chance that the Conservatives might be invited into any of these coalitions? Certainly during the May elections, I was putting my arm around lots of my Conservative friends and commiserating, because it did seem, compared with reform, from my point of view, seeing the better of two options. And so I was commiserating with lots of those people who, as we've always said, lots of them are really decent councillors. Do you think Conservatives will be invited to any of those?
Well, if you look at what happened last time, if you look at what happened at the County Council last time as an example, and at Huntingdonshire, people were not minded to do anything that involved getting into bed with the Conservatives. And the Conservatives, if anything, have got worse.
Well, if anything, I think on district level, the Conservatives are probably standing as usual candidates for all of the seats and are aiming to campaign for a majority. So I don't think that like those conversations even take place. But I think it's quite unlikely. But that's my personal view.
I think so too.
Yeah, there's a reality somewhere that if you look at what Germany do, and the Germans have made a point at a national level, which is to say that we will never negotiate to put the right into government, and all of the mainstream political parties have said that, there's a sense that, and I would say the far right rather than the right, and I wouldn't quite put Reform into that bracket, although some of what they do is close to it. But that there may be that in a run up to an election, the political parties sit around a table and say maybe that's what we should do. Is commit to that. Whether they say it overtly during an election campaign, because all it'll do is drive votes to Reform or whoever. But certainly sitting the table beforehand and coming to that sort of agreement.
Let's just move in a second. Let's move on to perhaps the far right or the protest marches in London. But I have observed since we've moved to the Sunday light slot, our audience is getting a lot less woke, and we're getting a much broader spectrum of opinion. So we've clearly got some Reform voters and supporters in the comments, and you're very welcome. And also Andrew, who is obviously clearly a supporter of U Party and Jeremy Corbyn thing. So it's really good to have a diversity of opinion because it makes it more fun. Because it stops us being stuck in a bubble with.
I really like the challenge as well. Actually, I really do like it. It's really good, even though I don't agree with a lot of it. I agree with some of it, but not all of it. But the challenge is great.
And of course, we have Anthony as well, who always tells us the reality of local government funding, which I always appreciate his informative links and commentary around, the combined authorities as well as local government, various layers of funding and issues.
And although Anthony and neither Anthony or his dragon have ever been elected, he remains my favourite figure in local politics and probably the person who's taught me most, I think. Right, so we said we're going to move on to the demonstration in London on Saturday. I was responding to some Facebook comments earlier where someone was claiming there were 500,000 people in London at the protest, or the police were saying there's 110,000. I was involved, remember the Gulf War marches back in the day, and ever since, whenever you go on a march, everybody on the march claims there's about 5 times as many people as there actually are. So whether it was 500,000 people or 100,000 people, still a lot of people turned up, didn't they? They were definitely more than you'd usually expect, more than the Premier League football crowd, which is like my criteria for a decent turnout. So what do we think about those protests? Do you think that they're illustrative of the way that the general population feels on this issue?
It's hard to say. There's certainly the thing is driven by mostly by the immigration debate, but I think arguably underneath that there's a failure of politics as well. I do think there's a common sense thing that people are entitled to believe that there is some level of control over immigration, and the boats thing especially, creates the impression. And I'm wording what I say very carefully here, that we are not in control of immigration, and I don't think entirely we are. I also think there's a reality, which is that is a problem that was created by the Conservative Party. There's no two ways about it. And I still think the biggest way you can make an impact on people's perceptions of what immigration is like in this country is to start turning around asylum applications a lot quicker. And the Labour Party seem to be, in reality, they seem to be doing that.
I think there's always when there's a march or a protest on any topic, there are different motivations for people for being there. So obviously there's been some very quite violent and aggressive and far right and outright racist behavior and things said, and this like shouldn't. I mean, I support people's rights to protest, but I don't support people being like, you know, violent, whether to like, you know, counter protesters or to police officers or to whoever. You know, there were some reports of like throwing things at, and that's not the majority of people there, but I think that's one issue that's kind of a separate discussion. But then in the people who are not, you know, who are not doing anything violent in the protest, I think there are different motivations. Like some people obviously are motivated by perhaps immigration as an issue, but I was reading some commentary of people saying like, well, you know, like I'm there because the government doesn't listen to us, or, you know, wanting to feel proud of being British again, and kind of more generic things that you're not necessarily having far right views on immigration. So I think often when we speak about whatever protest, whatever topic, we tend to generalize about every single person that they're like this or like that. But there might be different motivations why some people go there. But I think the kind of like far right rhetoric and the outright racism that's been sometimes said, I think that should be obviously addressed, and that's not okay to say that. And I acknowledge the kind of impact of the national narratives on this, because even when you post something now about immigration or anything positive on, let's say, X or whatever, you get, whether it's like people who are trolling or like, you know, or bots or like real people, you get like so much more content. You see like, you know, members of parliament or councillors of ethnic minority backgrounds, of, you know, or who are not born in the UK, getting so much more like kind of racism, xenophobia, comments and abuse. And I think that's something that has shifted in the last few years.
That's one of the things that the rise of the right and this is not necessarily Reform Party membership, but the existence and the growth of Reform has facilitated this. And I'm not saying Reform are necessarily guilty, although I will say that there are more people that I'm comfortable with as Reform Party members who are racists. But there is a reality that people seem to be and seem to think increasingly that it is okay to be racist.
Yeah.
And we had the conversation in the week, Stephen, about Ben Abasi-Jekti and some of the comments he's got. And I've got another friend of mine who's an Asian member of parliament, former work colleague. And, you know, she had a comment posted. I'm going to repeat what the comment was. The comment was posted about why isn't she in her corner shop?
Yeah, and I've got another very good friend who happens to be a Romanian county councillor who also gets almost every, especially on X, but in other places as well, gets all sorts of diatribe saying that you shouldn't stand here, you shouldn't be here, you should go back to your own country, and all sorts of nonsense. The stuff. Yeah, I'm you know me, I'm honest. I'm a big fan of what Ben's done in Huntingdon. I think he's done a great job, even though he beat Alex in the election. But I think he's done a great job as an MP. Yeah, and the sort of racism leveled against him, who is a former member of our military. Yeah, or, you know, all round decent bloke. Yeah, and a good MP. Yeah, is absolutely unacceptable, and it's disgusting, and that's changed in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
we didn't get that at all.
Yeah. Because it's not attacking for the ideas anymore. Like of what I got when I got involved in politics, people being like, you know, attacking, I don't know, because you're like Labour Party, or maybe people from the Conservative Party being like, oh, they're like attacked because they're a Tory or like Tory ideology. Now it's like much more personal. So now like the negative comments towards Ben are like because of his skin color, and outright racist comments on X, and the kind of xenophobic comments I get being like, go home, or like you'll be deported when Reform win and stuff like this, is purely because I'm not born in the UK. It's not because I have a particular ideology or view, or I made a specific comment. You know, if you just put a very positive story, like the other day I said like, oh, it's like 13 years since I've been in the UK, and just like said a generic comment about like, oh, I think in this debate that can be quite complex and emotional, we have to focus more on what unites us, what brings us, what is our commonality. And you get like tens of comments being like, you'll be deported, and I have to say to people that you can't really deport a British citizen without deprivation of citizenship and so on, and people think the law can be changed overnight on that. So, but that's the kind of thing, is like it gets so much more persistent because some people feel more legitimized in the current context to actually say those things as okay things to say, whether it's like saying a racist comment towards a member of parliament, or like saying a xenophobic comment to me, or just saying any kind of content like this on social media.
Agree. I'm just going to flick this up from Claire again about Musk, and not because I want to get into that part of the debate, because I don't, but there is a point here, which is a lot of this abuse is coming through, and a lot of this racism is coming through X. And if Musk really wants to get involved, that's what he should be dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah,
But yeah,
I used,
Yeah.
to love, I used to love Twitter and love X, and I've kind of
Yeah.
abandoned it a bit now because it's too negative.
It's got it's shocking, and it's the fact that there are so many people that feel like they have been enabled to start being racist and to be racist. People like Ben, who's a fantastic campaigner for Huntingdonshire, and in my view, he gets it right in terms of the balance. Where what he's doing is he's focused on Huntingdon issues and how Parliament impact on them, rather than doing what a lot of MPs do because it's easy meat for them, which is just to slam the local council all the time. And I think he gets that right as well. He sometimes does, but he's there for Huntingdonshire as far as from what I see, and I really like it. But sorry, there's a knowing look from Stephen where he's going to disagree with me.
No, I don't. I mean, I think. I fell out with Ben during the election campaign a bit because I did think he was a bit kind of just like being anti everything. Yeah, but since he's been elected, and also because he was standing against my friend Alex, to be honest. But since he's been elected, I think he does a really good job. I think MPs don't really have much power at all, do they? They don't. They have little influence, but what they should be is being champions for their local area, and he's done a fantastic job, much better than his predecessor Jonathan Ginoglu did, and I'd argue much better than some of the other MPs in that area. He's he was on the list of the new MPs who contributed most in Parliament. He was by far away at the top. He's always talking, he's always fighting, he's very visible. Yeah, and like I meet people who see him out of his dog on a Saturday morning talking, interacting with everybody, and he wins people over that way. So I think he's doing a great job. And I met when I met him, I hadn't met him before the May election counts, and I stood and talked to him for like 45 minutes. Yeah, and he won me over as well. I thought he's fantastic. So I
have a lot of time. I think one day he'll lead the Conservative Party, well, if the Conservative Party still exists, that's another thing. But
we'll get to see about that. But I think it's an interesting point around the kind of constituency or local level work that tends to be like less controversial, and what you do in Parliament, obviously, whether you vote for certain things, whether you have like private members' bills, or like what kind of issues you champion in Parliament. Because I think what we need more of as well, like across parties, is like the good constituency MPs as well, because like I think being active, being visible, obviously, like Stephen says, like going to events, obviously having a team around you that does your casework, and being responsive to constituents. I think that's like one side of it, and it's like in a way not the easiest thing to do, but it's the nicer bit to do than the kind of like work in Parliament, where that's where like the kind of dividing lines I think are, whether you voted for or against this, or whether you push a certain legislation through. Because I think no one will criticize you for being, I think like everyone will welcome you being present and championing local issues.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's an issue here, and I this is something I always take up about any councillor and who belongs to a political party, especially, or any member of Parliament, is you get these things about, first of all, people tend to have reasons why they voted. And, there are arguments in favour of zero-hours contracts or elements of zero-hours contracts. And I know that may sound like people don't like it, but also these guys have got whips that they've got to deal with. And what you don't know is the conversation.
Usually the answer is the whip.
Yeah, you don't know the conversations they've had with the whips, how they've tried to move the whips to vote in and move in certain directions, and all that sort of stuff. And none of us ever know that. So when you just say he's a rubbish MP because he voted to support zero-hours contracts, it just shows, I'm sorry, Andrew, but a lack of understanding about how the political system works. And I'm just going to go back. I don't want to talk about zero-hours contracts particularly. I've had friends who are at university that absolutely loved zero-hours contracts because it allowed them to work just in McDonald's or wherever and earn some money while they were back from university. And they didn't have to work while they were at university and during term times. So there are reasons why elements of zero-hours contracts work. So
I mean, the issue has been obviously, like, as always, like kind of the labor exploitation that comes with it. And like, kind of, I think like as a measure, like personally, I'm supportive of banning them. But I think you're right in terms of like the votes. Usually when Labour MPs are saying like, oh, so and so voted against or for this amendment or legislation, it's usually a collective agreement on that. So actually, to be interesting to see like what the individual MP actually thinks on this issue and asking the question, because often it is voting with, I think every single Conservative MP voted in the same way because you're opposing the government's legislation. I think there are very rare instances where you're voting with the government on something if the government is not your party.
So it's worth raising. The last time I stood for Whittlesey, the thing that cost me in that election was a leaflet that the Conservatives put out last minute that I didn't really get a chance to respond to, and I probably didn't respond to well enough. And that was to do with the fact that I voted in favour of Saxon pit being used for waste. And there's a reality about that, which is, yes, I did, as did every single Conservative at that time. And it would have been more than just the Conservatives as well, because at that time we were running a minority administration. In fact, no, we weren't. Sorry, that's a lie. Scrub that bit. We weren't. It was before the minority administration. But every single Conservative would have voted in favour of it. But what people don't know and don't understand is the conversations I had and the assurances I was given about how well it would be monitored, what it would be used for, and all those things, and having conversations with officers about it. And those are the things that, those comments are really easy to say without understanding, exactly how the political system works and what does. The reality about Saxon Pit, which is what's gone on in there, is absolutely shocking. And, it's certainly true that the assurances we were given about monitoring and stuff were not followed up when it was implemented and used. That's a shame.
Yeah, and we have to take difficult decisions all the time, which, that you have to try. There's lots of things, especially when I was a county councillor, people have called me out on votes I've made, and sometimes where I changed my mind on certain things, like the Coat and Orchard thing, and I was convinced by arguments. And it's difficult, isn't it? They're always difficult decisions, and there's quite often two sides to the argument, and you make the best decisions you can with the information available at the time. And sometimes that information is not correct, and with hindsight, good decisions when you made them were bad decisions in hindsight, which happens all the time, I think.
The other thing I would say with regard to that is we're in a position where we are increasingly enabled to justify how we vote with our electorate in a way that we haven't ever been before through social media and the like. So, more MPs should say, and as an example, we've got assisted dying going to be coming through again, and MPs should be putting on social media and whatever to people to say, this is why I voted this way on assisted dying, as an example. But they should do it more often on other issues, just so people have an understanding. You may not agree with how he voted, but he's got a methodology and a reason for it. It might be different to your reasons, but they're still valid from his perspective, or his or her perspective. Let's put it that way. Sorry.
Yeah,
the assisted dying is an interesting example, because I think there are quite a few MPs who are like, well, I'm not against this in principle. I don't have a reason why I'm opposing it per se, but I am not necessarily for how the legislation was being written, or like I'm not feeling confident about the safeguards in place. So I think there are a lot of people who are like in the middle, whether they go for or against. And often when you have like a certain bill in Parliament, you might not agree with 100% of it, although you might support it in principle.
But there's nothing wrong with putting on Facebook as an example. Look, this vote was a 3-line whip. I had to turn up and I had to vote, and I had to vote with the party whip. These are the issues that were discussed. These are the things that people are saying to me about why they disagree with it. These are the counter arguments. And MPs have got the ability to do that. Some people won't care. There's no two ways about it. Some people won't care that voting against something that they support is a vile thing. And that's the way some people are. And that, sadly, is how modern politics is. Too much modern politics is. But some people will care. And some people will read it and understand. And more MPs should do that.
Yeah, and during the last general election,
and councillors, by the way,
it's true. But during the last general election, in most constituencies, you had the option of voting for candidates who said they wouldn't be whipped. I think the Lib Dems claim not to be. I think the Greens claim not to be. As an independent,
the Greens is actually in some councils.
Sorry.
Well, with the Greens, it's true actually. In some, not all councils, but in a lot of councils, they actually don't have a whip.
2013, UKIP got elected, got 12 people elected, and they said that they didn't have a whip, and they were the most loyal to the UKIP whip, to the whip than any other individual was to any party.
It can happen.
Reality.
Yeah, and obviously the coalitions as well, because whilst you might say like this party doesn't have a whip, then if you have a joint administration and so on, you might have that kind of additional layer to it, even if you are like, let's say, yes, you can be, as an example, like an independent councillor, but still part of an administration that might have an agreement on certain things, like, I don't know, the budget, of course. And like,
so both the administrations I've been part of at County and at Huntingdonshire basically said that the only thing we can be whipped is on the budget.
Yeah.
And in reality, I mean, that means there's other options as well. If you didn't want to be whipped on the budget and you disagree with the budget, well, there's other choices as well. So I'd say that I've never been whipped, and that, well, only in my personal life. That's not true either. Don't clip that one. Yeah, so I've never been whipped, nor would I want to be whipped, but it's part of the political machine.
There are times I look back in the past where I wish I had voted against the whip, and I regret. And I can give one example actually, because we're still suffering from it in Fenland, which is the last Fenland local plan. And the reason for that is I do not think that the consequences of this 250 home windfall policy were made known to us until until it was too late is a reality, and that 249 home windfall policy has been a blight on Fenland, as far as I'm concerned, and it's a shame on the administration. It's a shame on the administration actually that they haven't moved forward with a new local plan in any meaningful way. They're supposed to. You try and look at what Fenland are doing with their local plan, which is what decides where your housing is going to go, and it is really clumsy to work out. They're saying they're consulting in September on the local plan. That's what the local development scheme says. But there's no sign of it anywhere. And you think about then what Huntingdon did with their local plan, where they're putting leaflets through doors, they were putting adverts on bin lorries and stuff to make sure people understood. And in Fenland, nobody even knows that somewhere in the middle of somewhere there's a local plan process going on that is basically going nowhere. And sorry, Andrew, I never voted for the budget at HDC because I've never been an HDC councillor.
I don't quite understand this comment, but I voted for the budget at HDC and was part of preparing it. So, which workers pay? I don't quite understand the question. I think we're like an hour and 7 minutes in, and largely the comments have dried up now. It has been really fantastic to see the variety of opinion in our comments. Yeah, we might have been accused of being a bit woke in the past, but we've certainly had people from all sides of the political spectrums today, which is very welcome. Maybe everybody's a bit more radical on Sunday nights when they've got work on Monday morning, but we're very grateful.
Or after they go to the pub at lunchtime.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So unless I'm not accusing you all of being drunk. So.
Right. Unless we've got any other further comments, shall we call it a day for this Sunday now?
Yes, great. It's been really good, and thanks everybody for commenting again. It's really, really good.
Well, thank you for hiding our lack of preparation.
I'm not going to plug it up, but JP, I will never ever agree with you about what you've said about Tommy Robinson. By the way. Yeah,
I think Tommy Robinson is a massive racist, but let's talk about it another time. All right, thank you very much.
It will be the next topic, but meanwhile, thank everyone for the comments. It's actually great to see the engagement this evening.
Yeah. All right, have a lovely Sunday evening, what's left there, and we'll see you next week at the same time, I guess. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. See you all.